Hey everybody, it's time to learn anatomy and physiology. So I'm excited to work with you guys this semester, even though we will be working online. The first thing we really need to start with, though, is what is this class about? What is anatomy and physiology? Well, to boil it down to its simplest thing, anatomy is really parts list. Right? It's a list of the body's parts and also the relationship between those parts. Now, what I mean by relationship between the parts is, for example, we're going to learn some directional terms in a few minutes, and we might talk about the fact that if something is further from the point of attachment, further from my shoulder out towards my fingers, we say that it is distal, and if it is closer to that point of attachment, then we say that it is proximal. So to say that my humerus in my upper arm is proximal relative to the radius and ulna in my forearm, that's still anatomy. It's still kind of talking about that parts list and how those structures are related to each other. So then what's physiology? Well, you might not be happy to hear this, but really, physiology is a whole lot of that, because physiology is how your body works. And how your body works is by having atoms and molecules interacting with each other and performing chemical reactions that build things and break things down. So we're really going to be spending this semester learning an awful lot of chemistry. Now, before you get too stressed out about this, I really should probably wear a little sign on my forehead that says not a chemist. I am a biologist. I love studying anatomy and physiology, and I'm going to share as many different tips and tricks on how to understand the chemistry and relate it to this class, and not in the depth that they would cover in a chemistry class. But let's say, for example, I ask you a question on a test, and I say, which of the following things would be studied by somebody who is strictly an anatomist or somebody who is strictly a physiologist? Well, to figure it out, you don't necessarily need to know what each of those different things, those choices that I've given you are. You just need to look for some key words. If I'm looking for how something works, then I'm going to be looking for verbs, right? So that means if I said, you're going to study how molecules are pumped across a membrane, or how a muscle contracts, or how a neuron fires. These are all action things. Something's happening. So that means that those are examples of physiology. Now we need to understand the organization of the body. So if we start from the smallest thing, and I'm going to add a little bit to this list here, we're going to start at the very smallest level with an atom. So we want to get to ultimately understanding how the whole body works, how that organism functions. And to understand that, though, we need to understand how all of the different atoms that are being built into bigger molecules and even bigger macromolecules, how those are interacting with each other to form different structures and how those structures interact with each other. So you need to know the different levels of organization, and we're going to start right at the very bottom. So we're going to start with atoms. We're going to build those into larger molecules, those into really big molecules called more macromolecules or organic molecules. We're going to use those big molecules to build mini organs inside cells. So a mini organ is called an organelle. We're going to use those to build different types of cells. Cells that work together for a common function are tissues. We can use tissues to build organs. Those organs work together for a common overall function, like, for example, digestion, and that would be an organ system. And then all of those systems work together so that the organism can survive. Now we're going to start at the very bottom, so we're going to start with atoms and molecules and build those up to different tissues. And then ultimately, we're going to study the body system by system. Keep in mind, every system works in conjunction with every other system. So we can't forget the stuff that we learned before because we're going to keep using it to understand the next system. So if you feel stuck or you're struggling with any particular topics, it's important that you reach out to me early, or for that matter, work with each other, ask each other questions, ask me questions, and understand stuff before you move on to the next topic, because everything builds on the stuff from before. And everything that you're learning in this semester is going to be critical for helping you in Bio 153, the second half of anatomy and physiology, and then, of course, in your clinical programs. All right, so I said classification of living things is important, but I'm not just going to give you a boring list like this and say put these in order from least to most complex. You know, a middle schooler or an elementary school student could do that. You're college students, so I might give you this list. So I'm going to periodically over the course of the semester in my lecture videos tell you to pause the video and write down an answer or figure out an answer to something, and then turn the video back on and see how you did. So this is one of those examples. I want you to take the following things and I want you to put them in order from least to most complex. So pause the video and then come back and I will walk you through the answer. So we said before that the least complex thing is an atom, but we do actually have subatomic particles called electrons, protons, and neutrons. So this electron down here would actually be the lowest level. You might not have known that yet, and that's okay, but once we get through chemistry, you'll understand that better. We use electrons, protons, and neutrons to build those atoms, so you might have had that listed as level 1. We use atoms to build molecules. Molecules we use to build macromolecules and organelles. I actually don't have any organelles listed in this particular list. So then we're going to jump up to organelles are used to build cells. Cells are used to build tissues. I don't have tissues on this list, so we go to the next level, which would be organs. So the brain is an organ. Organs work together to form systems, and then ultimately our organism. Now I just picked a dolphin because that happens to be my background, is studying marine mammals, and I always think it's kind of fun to sneak them in whenever I can. So it's important again to understand how all of the different body systems are interconnected. To start off, you need to know what each of those different systems is called and what their basic functions are. So let's go through those really quickly. So your integumentary system, this you may know best as your skin and accessory structures. So hair, nails, things like that. The primary function for your integumentary system is, of course, protection, although it does an awful lot of other stuff as well. Your skeletal system includes your bones and cartilage, and obviously that's going to help us with things like support, but we're also going to make blood in the bones, and we're going to provide leverage for movement, so muscles can pull on those bones, and we do other things as well. Of course, your skull is particularly important in your rib cage at protection. Then we have our muscular system down here. Our muscular system, in particular, we're talking about skeletal muscle here. So skeletal muscle is going to help us to move, to generate heat, and then it also helps us with protection. I would argue too, a lot of books don't include this, but I would argue that we do an awful lot of communication with each other using our skeletal muscles, right? Whether we're using facial expressions, we're talking, and that uses muscles, shrugging our shoulders, anything like that can be communication. Our nervous system over here includes the brain, the spinal cord, and then all of these little yellow nerves that are branching off, the peripheral nerves. And this is going to be important for controlling and regulating the body. So it receives signals and then it sends out communication and instructions to the body to act. Now your endocrine system, I like having these on the same slide because your endocrine system also controls and regulates the body. It just does it using hormones, whereas the nervous system uses electricity. We use, in the endocrine system, chemical messengers, also known as hormones. Our cardiovascular system includes the heart and all of those blood vessels going out to the body and back. I can sum up really the function of the cardiovascular system in one main job, which is transport. It is the organ system that allows the rest of the body to communicate and interact with each other. Without that cardiovascular system and those blood vessels, then your endocrine system would not have a way to get hormones to target cells, for example. The lymphatic system is going to help us with protection by helping to provide something called immunity. And that is particularly relevant right now in the news, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Your digestive system, a lot of times people think of your digestive system as being the system that helps you to break down food. But you know what? It really doesn't matter if you break down food if you can't absorb it. So the main job ultimately is for it to bring those nutrients into the body. If it has to break molecules down first before it can do that, then it will. Your respiratory system up here has a main job of bringing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. Now, if you're familiar at all with A&P, you might remember that oxygen is used to make a very important molecule called ATP. ATP is kind of like your money in the bank. That is your spending money that your cells can use to run different activities within the body. Carbon dioxide is given off as a waste product when you're making ATP. And the problem with that is carbon dioxide in solution becomes something called carbonic acid. And we will talk about that more later, but carbonic acid building up in the bloodstream is bad because you can go into something called acidosis and systems start to fail. So it's important that we breathe out that CO2 so that we don't build up too much acid in the bloodstream. And then your urinary system here, this is the part of your body that's going to help you to eliminate or dump all waste products. The vast majority of waste is dumped out through urine. Your digestive tract isn't really dumping waste from the body. The waste that you are excreting when you defecate from the digestive tract is really mostly food that you couldn't break down. So the actual waste products that are building up in your bloodstream and in your tissues are being dumped from the urinary system through urine. And then our last systems are male and female reproductive tracts, and those are going to have the primary job, obviously, of producing offspring. But in this case, because we have two very different systems and we reproduce sexually, then we're going to have genetically different offspring. So although some people might argue with me if they've ever met my daughter and I, because everyone says she's a clone of me and my mini-me, technically she is genetically different than I am. All right, we'll stop there and we'll come back in the next video and talk about homeostasis.